Well, the nuclear discussion has escalated quite a bit in the last few weeks to the point where Russian media is openly discussing detonating a tactical nuclear device inside of Ukraine as a rational response to a recent Ukrainian strike. So that's, good news for the world. Now, to provide a little background and context here, about a week ago, Ukraine struck the Armavir radar station inside of Russian territory. And this is notable because it's the first time in this war that Ukraine has struck anything that belongs to Russia's General Strategic Defense Network. So the Armavir radar station, and we'll pull up a map here to show you where this is located. We've got Ukraine here in the middle of the screen, moving down southeast, just zooming in a little bit, and you'll start to see Armavir pop up here on the map. This radar station and the two radars that were destroyed, or at the very least damaged, are ultra-high frequency over-the-horizon radars and, again, are a part of Russia's nuclear ballistic early warning system. So, amongst other things, they're designed to identify when possible nuclear weapons are inbound to Russian territory. Now, there has been some speculation as to the purpose of these radars and how they play into the current fighting in Ukraine. There's some conversation that these radars could have been used to identify and then lead to the shoot down of Ukrainian ATACMS, the Army Tactical Missile System, that have been used pretty extensively in Crimea here, just a little bit to the west. But there's also an argument. I've seen some experts come out and say that, hey, the radars here in Armavir were not pointed at Ukraine. They're actually directed southwest towards Turkey, trying to detect possible missile launches from NATO territory, not from Ukraine. I'm not sure. I've seen arguments on both sides of that. But either way, regardless of which direction it's pointing, the fact that this radar was struck at all has pretty significant broader ramifications. So the two Voronezh DMs at the facility are part of Russia's, again, larger strategic early warning network, and their degradation, even temporarily, could significantly impact Russia's ability to detect incoming nuclear threats. So put yourself in Russia's shoes, or anyone's shoes for that matter. When one of your early warning radars is offline, that becomes a major concern, right? And that's the kind of the focus of what Russian media is hitting on right now. This also ties into kind of the basic principles of the state policy of the Russian Federation on nuclear deterrence that the Kremlin put out just a couple of years ago. And there's people arguing that this attack on Armavir could meet the conditions that the Russian government laid out publicly in 2022 for actions that could trigger a retaliatory nuclear strike. The text of that document says the conditions specifying the possibility of nuclear weapons use by the Russian Federation include any attack by an adversary against critical governmental or military sites of the Russian Federation, disruption of which would undermine nuclear forces' response time. And this isn't a secret how this ties into Russian nuclear doctrine. We've talked about it before on this channel. There's other areas that are much more finicky and vague, if you will. But an attack on the nuclear deterrence infrastructure has never really been a question, right? If you think about how a nuclear war would be waged, one of the arguments would be that the early warning radars would be the first thing to go, and they'd be followed up with a nuclear strike of sorts. That is where the Russian concern is coming in here. Then shifting over to Rybar, a major Russian media outlet, now not technically affiliated with the Russian government, so I want to be clear, this is Russian media. This is not the Russian government saying this, but we're going to see some of this intertwining here in a moment. Rybar just posted the other day saying, if the attack is confirmed, then we are faced with a very obvious question. What will the response to this provocative step? The purpose of which is to test the reaction of the Russian leadership. So again, Russia is viewing this as a test of Putin and of the Russian military and the leadership inside of the country. They say in any other situation, it would be logical to deliver a massive strike on the place from which the launch was carried out, as well as the production of these drones. And worth noting, it sounds like from all the information we have at this point, the strike was carried out with Ukrainian drones and not Western supplied weapons. That's going to be important as we get into some other portions here. They say, however, in Ukraine, assembly is taking place at several points, including underground, and the launch is carried out from different regions. In this case, such a response can hardly be called proportionate, which brings us closer to more serious measures leading to total escalation in the form of limited use of weapons of mass destruction, such as tactical nuclear weapons. So what they're saying is there's not like one place they can go after that launch these drones. There's multiple manufacturing sites, multiple launch locations, and just they're taking those out or targeting those at least every single day. So if Russia views this strike against the radar station as a significant escalation, and then they carry out a strike that they've been carrying out for weeks, months, even years now, how is that really viewed as a response? That's kind of Rybar's argument here, which leads them into this argument that tactical nuclear weapons need to be on the table. They say it is not necessary to deliver a strike with these tactical nuclear weapons. It would be enough to conduct a practical exercise of the strategic nuclear forces with a demonstration of the tactical nuclear weapon attack on some training ground near Ukraine. And Rybar continues saying the situation itself is not simple. Essentially, a strike has been carried out that automatically falls under the provisions of Russia's military doctrine, which puts the leadership in a position where a response is obligatory. Inaction will put the state in an even more dangerous position where attacks will become more frequent, and in the future, ATACMS or Storm Shadow missiles may be used. Now, I think it's important here to recognize the Russian position, where they're coming from, and how they're viewing all of this. It's easy to brush this all aside because Russia has saber-rattled about nuclear weapons for a long time. And there's been a significant uptick since the war kicked off in Ukraine. I mean, just within the last week, Russia kicked off a series of tactical nuclear exercises designed to test those weapon systems, they say, as a direct response to some of this aggressive language coming out of Western leaders. So, that has been a thing, and we've kind of become jaded with how often Russia brings up the nuclear issue. But in this case, the idea that an early warning system focused on nuclear deterrence is damaged, destroyed, taken out of commission, that could prompt a significant retaliatory strike is normal, right? It's probably something we would do as well. Now, I would argue that does not mean that you automatically jump into detonating a tactical nuclear device in someone else's country, but an over-the-top response is kind of what you would expect from something like this. Something that damages or degrades your ability to essentially protect your country from a nuclear type event, right? So I do think it's important to try to put ourselves in Russia's shoes as they're viewing this event play out. And then kind of in line with that, an interesting statement by the Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski yesterday in an interview where he said, quote, "The Americans have told the Russians that if you explode a nuke, even if it doesn't kill anybody, we will hit all of your targets in Ukraine with conventional weapons. We'll destroy all of them." And he added that he viewed this as a credible threat. Now, the timing here is hard to figure out exactly, right? It's hard to say what conversations are being had behind closed doors versus when they make their way out into the public. But it's notable that just a series of a couple events here over the course of the last week, and all of a sudden, tactical nuclear weapons are back in the conversation like they haven't been in a long time, if ever. At least during this conflict, right? In the opening days of the conflict, people were talking about that. There was no real chance Russia was going to use these in the first month or two at all. Then they popped up a little bit more when Ukraine started to retake territory in the fall of 2022. The idea that if Russia has to fall back too far, would they detonate a nuclear device? The conversation was there. Personally, I didn't think it was in the cards. I've even talked in the last few weeks how Russia going nuclear around something like Crimea is not in their best interest, and it's hard to see them taking that step. And then we all of a sudden have a series of events coming together here where there's major media outlets inside of Russia saying, actually, a tactical nuclear device in Ukraine might be the best response to what just happened. That's worth mentioning additional context here that there's been a lot of increased conversation around the use of Western-provided weapons to strike targets inside of inside of Russia, So I think there is a little bit of nervousness on the side of Russia that they could start seeing ATACMS and Storm Shadow strikes in places like Belgorod, Kursk, Rostov, and elsewhere. That's likely an aspect of this as well. Now, my interpretation of Sikorski's statement here, whether he was supposed to leak this or not, that the Americans are threatening the Russians to not go nuclear, is kind of laying the groundwork that these strikes are going to start happening. Right? There's been a lot of pressure from NATO and Western allies, various countries saying Ukraine should be permitted to strike inside of Russia with these weapon systems. I view all of this right here as kind of laying the groundwork of saying they're going to. Those ATACMS and Storm Shadows are going to start striking targets inside of Russia, and Putin might not like it, but nuclear is off the table. That's kind of my read here, so I wouldn't be shocked if you start seeing Storm Shadows, ATACMS, and others penetrating Russian airspace sometime here in the next few weeks. But either way, felt like this was worth covering. It's notable that the use of tactical nuclear weapons is in the discourse like this as being viewed as a viable option at all. So it's, of course, worth keeping an eye on. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our Substack, which we've recently renamed to Between the Lines with Preston Stewart, because it's not just me, but a group of analysts, researchers, writers putting together some really cool work on places like China, Myanmar, Iran, talking about Hezbollah, Hamas, Russia, Ukraine, the future of warfare, drones, AI, all sorts of stuff. I think it's pretty interesting. It's all linked in the description below if you want to check it out. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.